Ignored her whole life, she finally found peace until family secrets unraveled on her wedding day. What they planned in the shadows will leave you absolutely stunned. I used to think loyalty meant sticking by your family no matter what, but standing at the altar with no parents in sight, I realized loyalty without respect is just quiet self-destruction. Growing up, I thought our family was normal, at least as normal as a family with 2 kids and a 4-bedroom house outside of Chicago could be. We had cookouts in the backyard, weekend road trips, and a dog named Rusty who'd bark at the mailman like it was personal. But things took a hard turn the year I turned 11 and my younger brother Neil got diagnosed with asthma. You wouldn't think a pretty standard condition like that would tilt an entire family off balance, but the shift was immediate and brutal. One day, I had a brother with a puffer, the next, he was the center of our universe. I was the older sibling, the one expected to just understand, to get it when our parents bailed on my piano recital because Neil had a cough. To accept it when my 16th birthday was derailed because Neil had what turned out to be mild allergies. That day, my grandparents flew in from Florida. I still remember the way my grandfather's hands shook while cutting a grocery store cake they grabbed at the last minute. My real cake, the custom one I was so excited about, never made it to the party. My parents took it with them to urgent care and showed up hours later, exhausted and apologetic. The excuse was always the same: Neil needed them. And apparently, I didn't. It wasn't just the big moments either. It was the death by 1,000 cuts kind of pattern. Missed report card dinners. Unopened science fair ribbons. Even when I got valedictorian senior year, they stayed home because Neil was too anxious about finals, which weren't even until the following week. I stood at that podium looking out over 400 parents and peers, knowing mine hadn't even shown up to clap. That night, I ate steak with my best friend's family while they congratulated me like I was one of their own. Meanwhile, my folks stayed back at the house, holding Neil's hand through what amounted to a study schedule. College was no different, except now I was really alone. No financial help, no emotional backup, just me working 2 jobs, crashing in the library, and hoping I wouldn't burn out before midterms. Neil, meanwhile, had a college fund untouched by his so-called medical crisis. He still had the inhaler, sure, but I'd only seen him use it once in 4 years, and even then, it felt more like a stage prop than a necessity. When I finished my master's in chemical engineering, I was proud. I mean, deeply bone-level proud. I'd done it all on my own. I sent my parents front-row tickets to the graduation and reserved a table for dinner afterward, praying maybe just this once they'd show up for me. They didn't. Neil had a migraine. That night he posted photos on Instagram at a party. No signs of a headache. No signs of guilt. Years passed. I met Jamie, the kind of man who remembered little things like how I took my coffee and big things like why my accomplishments mattered. His family welcomed me like I was their missing piece. When I got promoted, his mom sent flowers. When my first paper got published, his sister framed it. I'd never known that kind of support. With Jamie, I finally felt seen, not in a performative way, but in that steady, shoulder-to-shoulder kind of way. When he proposed, there was no hesitation on my part. But the idea of inviting my parents and brother to our wedding sparked panic I couldn't ignore. I kept picturing Neil fainting during our vows or my mother rushing out of the reception to take his temperature. The thought of that circus wrecking the one day that was supposed to be mine made my stomach twist. So Jamie and I made the call: we wouldn't invite them. I lay awake for nights wondering if I was being unfair, if I'd regret it. But in the end, I knew I couldn't risk letting the same pattern spoil the most important day of my life. I didn't want to look out from the altar and see them walking out the door again. Not this time. Jamie supported whatever choice I made, but deep down we both knew what needed to happen. We planned a modest wedding. 80 guests. Mostly Jamie's people and a few friends who'd stood by me through it all. I invited my grandparents, aunts, and cousins, but asked them not to mention it to my parents or Neil. Most understood. Some were relieved. And for the first time in a long time, I was at the center of something, not because of a crisis, but because I'd earned it. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before my alarm, not from nerves, but from something quieter and stranger. Peace. For once, there wasn't a knot in my chest or a fear of what might go wrong. Jamie's family had taken care of everything down to the smallest detail. His mom was already in the guest suite with coffee and a gentle smile, asking if I needed help with anything. His sisters were buzzing around the dressing room with curling irons and playlists, treating me like royalty. And as much as I tried to keep myself grounded, I could feel a kind of emotion building that I didn't recognize, because I had never experienced joy without a shadow beside it. I kept waiting for the moment when the guilt would hit me like a freight train, but it didn't. Instead, as I looked out at the ceremony setup, 80 white chairs, pale green garlands, and the soft hum of music playing through the speakers, it felt like the first time my life had a spotlight that wasn't being stolen. There were no surprise asthma attacks, no crying phone calls from my mother about Neil's panic, no unexplained hospital runs. Just calm. Just me, standing in the center of a moment that belonged entirely to me and Jamie. His dad walked me down the aisle. I know that might seem strange to some, but it felt right. That man had shown up for every birthday, every work celebration, every graduation dinner since Jamie and I had met. He'd clapped louder than anyone when I got my research award. He knew what it meant to be a parent, not just in title but in presence. As he held out his arm and whispered, "Ready, kiddo?" I nodded, fighting back tears. And when I saw Jamie at the other end of that aisle, smiling like I was the only person in the world, all the pain and resentment faded like background noise. The ceremony went by like a dream. My vows, Jamie's steady voice, the way the sun filtered through the trees right as we said, "I do." Everything was perfect in a way I didn't think my life would ever allow. And then came the reception, where the surprises I had expected didn't show up. But others did. My grandparents were the first ones on the dance floor. My grandfather, who had always been quiet and reserved at family gatherings, took my hand during the father-daughter dance and whispered, "You were always worth showing up for." I could have fallen apart right there, but I held it together because this moment, this whole day was about presence, not absence. About love that showed up and stayed put. But peace, as I've learned, doesn't last long when ghosts aren't properly buried. Later that night, my cousin Kay pulled me aside near the bar. She looked uneasy, holding her phone in her hand like it was evidence in a trial. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low. "Your mom and Neil found out about the wedding, and they're not happy." I blinked. "How?" She glanced down at her screen. "I think it was Jenna, our other cousin. She posted a few pictures on Facebook earlier this afternoon. Your mom saw them." My stomach tightened, but not out of fear. More like the flicker of a storm on the horizon. Kay scrolled through a series of text messages my mother had sent to her. The tone was furious. Words like ungrateful, selfish, and drama queen lit up the screen like bullets. Neil, apparently, had been devastated. According to my mother, he had an anxiety episode so severe that they took him to the ER. But Kay hesitated before showing me the last message. "I don't know if you want to see this," she said, "but you probably should." It was a photo. Neil at a baseball game, hat on backward, beer in hand, laughing with two friends in the bleachers. Same day, same hour, in fact, as when he was supposedly in the hospital for a panic attack. I stared at the image for a long time, not sure whether to laugh or scream. The game was happening less than an hour from where we were holding the reception. Neil had once again taken center stage in a play that didn't belong to him. And my parents, true to form, had taken his side without even looking at the script. I handed the phone back to Kay. "Thanks for telling me. You're handling this better than I would," she said. But inside, something cracked. Not from hurt, from clarity. I wasn't the one who walked away from them. They walked away from me. Again and again and again, until one day I just stopped leaving the door open. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about closing it. The Monday after the wedding, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold between my hands, staring at my phone like it might explode. My voicemail box was full. My mother's voice weeping in one message, accusing in another. She said I had ruined the family, that Neil was in recovery now, as if my wedding had somehow been an act of violence against his well-being. I didn't even have the strength to open the texts. Jamie leaned against the counter, reading the headlines out loud from his phone about a biotech breakthrough in respiratory treatment, trying to distract me. I nodded, smiled when I could, but the truth was, part of me felt hollow. Not because I regretted anything, but because I didn't. That emptiness, I realized, was space. The kind that opens up when you've finally removed a weight you never knew was pressing down on you. Then Jamie's mom, Marion, called. She's a pediatric nurse, has worked with kids with real respiratory conditions for 3 decades, and knows how to sniff out a false alarm from a mile away. She'd seen the photo Kay had shown me Neil at the baseball game. "Mind if I talk to your mom?" she asked. I didn't know what to say. I just handed her the number. She called that evening, gently, politely, like only Marion could. Tried to extend an olive branch, maybe pave the way for a calm post-wedding celebration where we could acknowledge the elephant in the room without letting it destroy the furniture. She mentioned how Neil's supposed medical record didn't seem consistent with someone who hikes on weekends, plays softball twice a week, and drinks enough to celebrate losses like they were wins. She wasn't accusatory, just factual, clinical, even. But within minutes, my mom hung up on her. That same night, my mother called Jamie's sister to complain. She said Marion was overstepping, meddling, and disrespecting family boundaries. Jamie's sister, who's as blunt as a hammer, told her she was lucky Marion didn't call out the whole decade-long charade in front of everyone at the wedding. That conversation ended in yelling too. Should have hurt more. It should have made me question everything again. But instead, all I felt was a growing resolve. Like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I'd spent my whole life trying to decorate in the dark. That night, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. I was 17. Homecoming. I'd saved up 3 months of paychecks from my job at the campus bookstore to buy a dress. I had made the court not queen but runner-up. Still a big deal for a kid who was always overshadowed. I was curling my hair in the mirror when Neil started crying on the floor, claiming stomach pain so bad he couldn't walk. My parents left with him, promising they'd be back in time. They weren't. I sat in that dress for 5 hours. My date eventually went without me. My corsage wilted in the box. The pain in Neil's side? Guess. That was it. I never wore that dress again. Never even took the tag off. Suddenly, all those moments I had tried to dismiss as bad luck or bad timing began to look like a pattern. Carefully choreographed steps in a dance I didn't know I was part of. And now I was finally off the floor, breathless but standing. 2 days later, my Aunt Marlene, my mom's older sister, called. She started off like everyone else had. Said she was disappointed in me, that family deserves grace. But then something shifted. I told her everything about the messages, about Neil's fake panic attacks, about the photo from the game. There was silence on the line for a long while. "You know what?" she finally said, her voice quieter now. "Your mom always did make everything about Neil." She told me about a family reunion from a few years back. One I had forgotten. I'd just gotten promoted to head researcher, a role I'd worked years to earn. I tried to announce it during dinner, thinking maybe, just maybe, it would earn a nod of recognition. My mom barely let me finish before launching into a monologue about Neil getting a job at a grocery store. She remembered the way the room shifted, how even the little cousins looked confused, how no one said anything because, well, that's just how it always was. "She robbed you of your moment," Aunt Marlene said. "And we let her." I hung up the phone with something new in my chest. Not grief. Not regret. Validation. And when Jamie's dad raised a glass that night at a small family dinner and toasted not just to our wedding, but to me, to everything I'd built and fought for, I finally allowed myself to believe it. Maybe I wasn't ungrateful. Maybe I was just done being invisible. A few days later, I met Kay at a coffee shop downtown. Just a quiet place with burnt espresso and music low enough that it didn't drown out hard conversations. She'd asked to see me in person, said there was more to share. I thought I was ready, but I wasn't. Not for what she brought. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and held it across the table like a confession. "These are from the week before your wedding," she said. "Your mom didn't know I was still in that family group chat." She didn't realize I hadn't left. What I read made my stomach turn. There, in black and white, were text messages from my mother plotting. Plotting distractions. Plotting a disruption. Plotting ways to make sure Neil didn't feel isolated on a day that was all about me. She mentioned possibly orchestrating something that would remind people of what's really important, Neil's health. She talked about how Jamie's family would probably understand if there was a minor emergency. There were even emojis, laughing ones like it was some twisted joke. I scrolled in disbelief. My own mother had been planning a way to hijack my wedding before she even knew she wasn't invited. Kay saw the expression on my face and whispered I wanted to believe she wouldn't go through with it. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. I sat there frozen, the hum of the espresso machine in the background sounding like static in my ears. And then she showed me something else, older messages. This time from Neil himself. Ones she'd saved from years ago, thinking they were stupid teenager drama. He'd told her, drunk at a cousin's birthday party back in high school, that he used to fake symptoms. That he'd wait until I had something important coming up and suddenly feel off. He said our parents were so eager to jump into action that it became almost a game. They believe anything, he wrote. It's hilarious how easy it is. He was 15. 15 and already weaponizing sympathy. I had always suspected it, but seeing it in writing made it real in a way I didn't expect. And the worst part? That wasn't even the biggest bomb. Kay scrolled again. There's more. She tapped on a photo. A screenshot of Neil's Instagram story from the week before our wedding. He was at the gym, lifting weights, talking about training for the next 10K. Same day he supposedly had a severe migraine. Same day my parents canceled their RSVP to my degree ceremony years earlier because Neil wasn't well. A long silence stretched between us. I thought I was crazy, I said quietly. For years. Every time they skipped something of mine, I thought maybe I was just being dramatic. You weren't, Kay said. They made you feel invisible on purpose. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or just laugh at the absurdity. But what I did know clear as daylight was that I could never go back. Not to the way things were. Not even to the polite version of it. That night, I sat with Jamie and read every one of the messages aloud to him. He didn't say much at first, just listened, holding my hand tighter as I went through each sentence. When I finished, he stood up, walked across the room, and came back with a framed photo from our wedding. This, he said, pointing to a picture of us dancing while his mother and father watched proudly, is what family looks like. Not whatever they were doing. This. For the first time in years, I felt something inside me settle. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the ungrateful daughter. I wasn't the problem. I was the only one finally telling the truth. That night, I emailed the rest of the extended family. Politely. Firmly. I attached screenshots. I shared the story. Not for revenge, but for clarity. For those who'd been whispering, questioning, judging from the sidelines. Some apologized. Some stayed silent. A few had the audacity to say they were shocked, but I knew they weren't. They just never thought I'd speak up. I spent that weekend packing up keepsakes, my thesis certificate, framed articles, a few old photos that still held good memories. Jamie and I were getting ready to move to Boston for work, and suddenly the idea of leaving felt less like an escape and more like an evolution. I looked around our apartment one last time, thinking about how far I'd come without them. And how far I was going without looking back. A week into unpacking boxes in our new Boston apartment, a third-floor walk-up with creaky floors and big windows that faced a narrow street, I got an email that stopped me cold. Subject line, I'm sorry. It was from Neil. I stared at it for a long while, afraid to open it but more afraid not to. My heart pounded in that slow, sinking kind of way, like the body knows before the mind catches up. I tried texting him after Kay showed me those messages, tried reaching out to give him a chance to explain or even deny it. But he never responded. Until now. I clicked it open. It wasn't long. Just 3 paragraphs. But every word hit like a brick. He said he'd been in therapy. Not because anyone pushed him into it, but because he'd started having panic attacks for real and realized he didn't know where the line was anymore between what he felt and what he'd faked. He admitted that he used to make himself sick over the idea of me getting attention. Said it made him feel like he'd disappear if someone else was in the spotlight. That our parents trained him, accidentally or otherwise, to believe that being unwell was the only way to be seen. But what caught me off guard was the part where he admitted knowing exactly what he was doing. He said he remembered homecoming. Remembered the dress. Remembered sitting in the ER with my parents, watching the clock, knowing I was missing my moment. And doing nothing. I told myself I was just a kid, he wrote. But the truth is, I wanted to be the center. I wanted you to fade into the background. I saw how they looked at me when I coughed and how they looked through you when you excelled. And I got addicted to that look. I'm sorry. I don't know how to undo it, but I'm sorry. I sat there for a long time not knowing how to feel. On one hand, I had waited my entire life to hear those words. On the other, part of me didn't trust them. Not yet. Not after everything. Not after watching my parents weaponize his health and watching him allow it. I forwarded the email to Jamie. He read it twice before speaking. Well, he said, at least now we know he knows. That's something. But what he didn't say, and what I couldn't either, is whether that knowledge could fix anything. 2 days later, Neil messaged again, this time asking to meet for coffee. He said he wasn't expecting forgiveness, just a chance to look me in the eye without a script. Just a chance to start from zero. Jamie was cautious but supportive. He suggested I meet Neil in public just in case it turned into something I didn't expect. We chose a quiet cafe near Fenway. I showed up 15 minutes early and sat near the window. Neil walked in 5 minutes late, wearing a hoodie, hair longer than I remembered, looking like someone who hadn't slept in days. He sat down across from me and didn't say anything for a while. Just stared at the table. Then he said I deserved to be uninvited. It wasn't dramatic. Just matter of fact. Like someone finally saying the thing no one else had the courage to put into words. I nodded, not sure if I was ready to agree out loud, but not ready to argue either. I don't know who I am without being the one who needs saving, he said. I'm working on figuring that out. He told me about his therapist. About how he realized our parents didn't just neglect me, they made him dependent on being the crisis. That the reason he couldn't hold down a job, couldn't live without their financial support, wasn't because of asthma or anxiety, it was because he was never taught to live without a spotlight. They taught me that being broken was the only way to get love, he said. And they taught you that being perfect wasn't good enough. That line stayed with me. I didn't respond much during that first meeting. Just listened. Just watched him sit in the discomfort he used to flee from. And for the first time in my life, I saw my brother not as the boy who ruined my milestones, but as someone who had been ruined too, just in a different way. When we parted ways, he didn't ask for anything. No promises. No fresh start. Just a quiet, thank you for coming. As I walked back to the apartment, I didn't feel lighter. I didn't feel healed. But I felt still. And in my life, stillness was new. Later that night, I got another call. My parents. Blocked numbers, of course. I didn't answer. But the voicemail came through. It was my dad this time. His voice low, tired, like he was forcing humility through gritted teeth. I heard you met Neil. That was good of you. But he's not well again. The anxiety's back. We could really use some support if you have it in your heart. I deleted the message without playing it twice. Some lessons come late. Some never come at all. And some you teach by walking away for good. The voicemail lingered in my deleted folder for a day or two, like a ghost waiting to be noticed again. I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. I'd heard the same script in different voices for years, urgent tones, guilt-laced phrases, the heavy implication that their needs always mattered more than my boundaries. That somehow every rejection of their demands meant I lacked compassion, as if the capacity to love was measured by how much of myself I was willing to sacrifice. I didn't reply. And for the first time in my life, not replying felt like a complete sentence. Neil didn't follow up after our coffee meeting, and I respected that. He had said his piece, and I had absorbed it, not with forgiveness, not yet, but with a kind of cautious openness I hadn't thought I was capable of. What stuck with me most wasn't his apology or his regret, but the way he acknowledged the role he'd played without trying to excuse it. That mattered more than I expected. But my parents weren't interested in accountability. Not even close. 2 days after that voicemail, I got a call from Jamie's sister. Apparently, my mother had reached out to her again, this time asking her to mediate. She wanted to arrange a sit-down between me and the family as if we were strangers in a courtroom rather than people with decades of history. My mom used words like healing and rebuilding, but it was clear what she meant. She wanted things to go back to how they were. Before the wedding. Before the exposure. Before the curtain had been yanked down and everyone saw what lay behind it. I told Jamie's sister to politely decline. No meetings. No half-hearted reconciliations. No starting over on their terms. I'm not interested in rebuilding something that never had a solid foundation, I said. And I'm done setting myself on fire just to keep their version of family warm. That weekend, Jamie and I hosted a small dinner at our place. Nothing fancy. Just a few friends, a couple of his cousins, and my grandparents, who had made the trip from Chicago just to see our new home. They brought a box of old photos with them, ones I hadn't seen in years. In one of them, I was 6 years old, standing on the front steps of our childhood home, holding a cardboard sign that said, "First day of school." My mom's handwriting was on the sign. My dad's shadow stretched across the grass behind me. It hit me, not with sadness but with clarity, that even in those moments of normal, something had always been missing. Presence, authenticity, equity. My grandmother caught me staring at the photo and reached across the table to touch my hand. "You were always easy to overlook," she said gently. "Not because you were invisible, but because you never screamed for attention. You just did the work. Quietly, consistently. She looked at Jamie. She deserves peace now. Nothing less. That night, after everyone left, I found myself writing a letter. Not to send, but just to write. It started like this. Dear Mom and Dad, you taught me to be strong by never showing up. You taught me to be resourceful by never offering help. And you taught me what love shouldn't feel like. Conditional, manipulative, and always out of reach. I used to think if I just achieved more, you'd finally see me. But now I know you saw me just fine. You just chose someone else every time. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. I won't attend another staged reconciliation. I won't walk back into a house where love depends on obedience. And I won't answer calls that come disguised as concern but are really demands. I'm not the problem you need to fix. I'm the boundary you need to accept. This is not a request for change. This is a confirmation of mine. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. A goodbye I didn't need to send, but one I needed to write. For me. In the weeks that followed, I muted every family member who had once accused me of selfishness for protecting myself. Some came around, reaching out with quiet apologies, admitting they'd looked the other way for too long. Others doubled down, choosing silence or distance rather than confronting the mirror I'd held up to them. I didn't chase any of them. The people meant to be in your life don't need reminders of your worth. They just show up and stay. It was mid-October when Neil texted me again. Just 2 words. I moved. No pictures. No request for coffee. Just a quiet update dropped into my inbox like a pebble in a still pond. I stared at it, unsure of what to say. In the weeks since our meeting, I hadn't reached out. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even afraid. I was just cautious. Wounds like the ones we carried didn't close with one apology. They needed space, time, truth. Still, I responded. I hope it's your place, not theirs. He replied with a photo. A small studio apartment, plain white walls, mattress on the floor, a folding table set up with a laptop and a coffee mug that said try again tomorrow. He followed it with, paying rent with my own money. Job starts Monday. I didn't smile, but I felt something loosen in my chest, like a pressure valve finally letting go. He was trying. Not for show, not for approval, but for himself. A few days later, I heard from Kay again. She wanted to let me know something she'd debated sharing but ultimately felt I had a right to know. A few weeks before the wedding, she had confronted my mom over the texts, told her she knew what she was planning, warned her that if she went through with it, she'd lose more than just me. She said my mother's reaction was strange, not angry, not even embarrassed. She said it was the only way to make Neil feel important again. Kay told me over the phone. She truly believed that if she didn't create a reason for him to be the focus, he might spiral. That was when it finally clicked for me. It had never been about hurting me intentionally. It had been about maintaining a system. One where crisis kept everyone in orbit. One where Neil was fragile and I was self-sufficient. One where love was doled out like medicine, only to the sick. And for years I had been punished not for doing anything wrong, but for simply being okay. Jamie noticed the change in me that week. Not dramatic, just subtle shifts. I was quieter in the evenings, less reactive, more introspective. He asked if I was okay, and for the first time in months I answered honestly. I think I'm finally grieving the version of my parents I always hoped I had. He pulled me into him and didn't say a word. He didn't have to. That kind of grief doesn't need solutions. Just someone who's willing to sit with you in it. One afternoon, while reorganizing our bookshelves, I found the framed first page of my research paper, gifted by Jamie's sister years ago. I hadn't looked at it in a while, but when I picked it up, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the back, she'd written in Sharpie, "You shine whether they see it or not." I sat down on the floor with that frame in my lap, tears welling up. Not because I was sad, but because I felt seen. For so long, I had let my parents' blind spots define me. I measured my value by the attention I didn't receive, by the invitations that never came, by the love that always felt conditional. But now I was done holding my breath. Done begging for scraps at a table I never asked to sit at in the first place. The world hadn't changed. My family hadn't suddenly become supportive or self-aware. But I had changed. I was no longer looking for reconciliation. I was looking for peace. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a betrayal to want that. It felt like a birthright. It's strange what you carry with you after everything falls apart. Not just the scars, but the small things, too. The habits. The way you glance at your phone when a holiday rolls around, even though you know there won't be a call. The way your breath catches during conversations when someone says, parents, without thinking, and you smile like it doesn't land hard in your chest. But more than anything, you carry the decision. That moment when you chose to stop playing a role in a story someone else wrote for you. It had been 3 months since Jamie and I moved to Boston. The leaves had started changing, and every morning smelled like new beginnings. Wet pavement, crisp air, peace. We'd built a quiet rhythm. Coffee on the fire escape. Evening walks through our neighborhood. Laughter that didn't echo off old wounds. It was the kind of life I'd always wanted and never thought I'd have the nerve to claim. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I found a letter in the mail. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting instantly, my mom's. I stood at the counter for a long time, envelope in hand, trying to decide what to do. Part of me was curious. Part of me was furious that she'd somehow found our new address. But most of me didn't feel much of anything. And maybe that was the loudest message of all. I didn't open it. I placed it in a drawer with the unsent letter I had written to them weeks before. They could sit beside each other in silence. Two sides of a bridge I no longer needed to cross. The next time I saw Neil, it was purely by chance. He'd gotten a job at a small analytics firm downtown. I spotted him on the street during lunch, sitting outside with a coworker, laughing at something over sandwiches. He looked ordinary, not broken, not dramatic, just a young man finally standing on his own legs. I didn't interrupt. I didn't wave. I just kept walking. And it felt good watching him live his life and knowing that I didn't need to fix it or be damaged by it anymore. Letting go wasn't just about distance. It was about dignity. The holidays came and went. Jamie's family invited us to every gathering, every dinner, every sleepy Christmas morning filled with bad sweaters and warm cider. His mom slipped me a card on New Year's Eve. Inside was a simple note. Thank you for letting us love you. I cried harder over those 6 words than I ever had over the hundreds I'd begged from my own parents. And that was the thing. I stopped waiting for my family to say the right thing, to finally show up, to love me the way I deserved. I stopped needing it. Because once you accept that some people only love you in the ways that serve them, you're finally free to love yourself in the ways that serve you. As the new year began, I sat down at my desk, opened a fresh document, and started writing. Not about trauma or betrayal, but about growth, about resilience, about what it means to build a life that honors your own worth, even when the people who raised you never did. Jamie walked in, placed a hand on my shoulder, and smiled at the blank page. New project? He asked. No, I said. Just the ending of an old one. And with that, I closed the file. No need for punctuation. Some stories don't end with closure. They end with a choice. I chose peace. I chose me. And that finally was enough.